Hello, fellow tent pros. Welcome to the Pitch and Tents podcast with your host, Bryan
and Davis West. We got a pretty sick one today, don't we?
It's going to be a good time.
Yep.
We have a special guest today, Mr. Nick Deninno. How you doing, Nick?
I'm great. How are you guys doing?
We're great. We're great. For anybody that doesn't know, Nick is with Block and Roll or B&R Innovations, right, Nick? And we're going to talk all about today's subject is ballasting primarily, and going to let Nick talk a good bit about that. I'm just gonna roll through some different topics as it relates to ballasting because it's still such a hot topic. I don't know. This thing's been raging for 5 years or so. Wouldn't you say, Nick? Maybe more now.
Maybe a little more than that. Yeah, maybe a little more.
To be honest, this is the one that I've been asked about the most because after we did the staking one, everybody was like, "Hey, are y'all going to do one for ballasting?" Blah blah blah. I'm like, "Yeah, it's coming." And that's the one everybody wants to view. So.
Yep. So, without further ado, we're going to just jump right in with both feet. Let's let Nick talk a little bit about, Nick, who you are, history, background, and then after you be selfish and talk about yourself a little bit. Then I want to hear about B&R and Block and Roll.
Yep.
Well, my career started way back as a mobile DJ, believe it or not. Did that for a number of years as a side gig, and then I think it was about 1994, I opened up a indoor party place. So back in the day, though, there was a little bit of a rage, the indoor party places with soft play, and I had my DJ business doing parties. And then all of a sudden we were booked up and people said, "Hey, what do I do?" I says, "I don't know. I'll bring the party to you." What do you, and that's how Parties to Go was founded. True story. We started doing some small rentals and started with bounce houses and cotton candy machines and tables and chairs. And we also did catering, which was interesting for a rental company. So we started off doing catering as well because I had a kitchen at our place. So we were doing, picnics and basic stuff. And then the day came where we started doing some dabbling into tents and just kind of went in head over heels, bought my first tent, and we started moving. And I would say about 6 months later to buying my first tent, we bought out a small little company. At that time, I was on my own. I got my brother-in-law and said, "Hey, come on, let's go buy this company. It's too big for me to handle myself." And I have the other business that we were running, the party place. And we went and bought a little local tent rental, party rental place. And that's where I got introduced to Top Tech. We took over a bunch of Top Tech tents. I got to get my name straight. We had a single peak 60 wide. I don't remember the name.
That'd be an Epic?
Epic.
That's right. Yep. An Epic. And we had a bunch of your frame tents. I don't remember the model, but they packed up pretty small.
Standard frame
deluxe.
Yeah.
That's what this company was started on.
I actually just got back from Tennessee. A new guy just purchased one and went up there to train him on it. And he was like, "I can't believe that this fits in this little bag." They're in the back of your Camry, bro.
And we got introduced to ballasting because the company did a little bit of ballasting. And they didn't even have water barrels. They had these lead plates about the size of a dumbbell, but they were square. So that was our first little dabbling with ballast.
So I'll jump in real quick too. So the big part of a lot of people may not know about Nick, and the reason for ballasting too is geography. The geography, really dictated that you had to be able to put some temporary weight, not be able to stake so much with the environment you guys were working in, correct?
Oh, once we started, initially we were working on Long Island and we were able to stake, and ballasting really wasn't an issue. Once we started working in Manhattan, which kind of exploded for us and where the majority of our business wound up. And you just couldn't put a stake in the ground. And I can tell you all the different variations we tried to hold tents down for a lot of years, struggling and really having some issues. But yeah, we were forced to do that.
Yep.
Forced into it, if you say.
Just a blast from the past. How much did those initial ballast weigh that you were using?
I want to say they were 100 pounds or 80 pounds a plate.
Yep.
Very small. I mean, it was tiny. We were using it on small tents, one leg. We didn't know any better back then. Like everybody else, you don't know. You got to learn, and unfortunately, you learn the hard way.
Well, there wasn't that many studies that were done either back then that
No, the whole industry was different.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I keep thinking about is the whole industry is so different. None of us were doing this really, Nick's talking 30 years ago, which in the whole scheme of things is not that long ago. So look, think about the changes that have happened. I started in 2004. Davis, you've been doing this 10, 12 years, whatever, right?
Yeah,
and
almost 13 now.
Yeah.
Right?
So just in that time, it's amazing. And that's what we're going to talk about some today is about how much the industry's changed and then how we've been forced to think about what we do based on those changes and then the internal and external pressures on what we do. Internal being, what we need to do with how we run our business, but then the external on what the other people being codes officials, et cetera, or how they're dictating how we do things.
Right.
Absolutely.
So Nick, tell us, that's a good rundown on Nick and kind of your background. Tell us specifically about B&R and correct me if I'm wrong, B&R is the formal parent name and then you got Black and Roll as a brand under that, correct?
Correct. B&R Innovations, which in essence is Block and Roll.
Yep.
So I guess in my own tent business, we were struggling real hard with ballasting and we were doing larger jobs and we had some issues on jobs and we were the straw that broke the camel's back was we were using concrete because the first water barrel job I ever did, the tent wound up on the roof of the house with the water barrel swinging in the air. Luckily it hit a tree and stopped and didn't go any further. So we immediately switched to concrete. So we took all the water barrels and filled them with concrete. So we used those for a number of years. But after the second load we lost on the highway because a pallet broke and just they're unstable to transport. I just looked at it and said, there's no way, there's got to be a safer way to do this. And that's kind of how B&R was started.
Yeah, that's great. It just a blast from the past. Like I said, I grew up doing water barrels. We didn't know any better, and we didn't know that there was a better option out there until recently. I mean, even the company that I used to work for, like I said, all we used was water barrels, and now they're strictly Block and Roll.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little history on that, kind of somewhat tied to that too. We had a situation not long after I started. This would have been like late summer, fall of 2004. We had a customer that had a 40 wide that was staked on one long side and then ballasted being water barrels, back then, because that's all anybody used. It's funny, that same company now uses B&R or Block and Roll, but back then it was water barrels because that's all anybody knew. And the news that evening, this was on like a Sunday evening, and the news or whatever it was, anyway, the news showed this tent rolled over up on top of a building, and one of our base plates I could see exposed inside the building because it went through the ceiling. So I said, "Oh my gosh, that's our base plate. That's our tent. That's our base. That's ours." And so my wife goes, "How do you know?" I said, "Trust me, I know what I'm looking at." And sure enough, what it did is the same deal, straight line winds. This particular tent was set so that it was staked in the flower beds against the building, but in the parking lot side, they water barreled that side. So of course what it did, the stakes held and it just rolled the tent up on top of the building. And same thing as I remember people cutting ropes to let water barrels down, right?
Right.
It's the only way to do it. So
no, I've had my share of, not too many, but I've had my share of issues, and luckily a lot of our issues weren't that bad.
Yeah,
but it definitely puts it in perspective.
Yep. So Nick, tell us a little more about B&R in terms of what are the types of products you'll offer. Obviously, I want to give you a little bit of opportunity to talk about you guys and toot your horn. For those also that may not know, Nick's a heck of an innovator, one of the brightest minds, and I'm not just saying he's because he's here. I've told this to other people before, one of the brightest minds in our industry and always coming up with new ways of doing things that are pain points for so many in our industry. Nick keeps pushing that, and we're all thankful because there's a lot of product offerings. Why don't you talk about that for a minute?
I appreciate that. My wife will tell a different story about my mind. But,
well, all of ours.
That's between the two of you.
I guess basically in a nutshell, right? It's working in the industry, actually being out in the field. And I wasn't always a installer. I was the first installer at the company and worked on the trucks until, we got a little bigger, and then I was in the office. But I'd go out to jobs. I would help on the jobs. And then it got to a point where they didn't need my help, but I would go out and just observe, and I would watch what they were doing. And I would say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to change this. You need this or you need that to put this in so we can work easier. And that's what I started doing. So I just started making products for us to use initially. And that's really what started. And when you really understand the business and you really understand working in the field, you have a better mind for making something work. And I'll say that, any of the best products that are out there in the market today are because people were out there in the field and really understood the need. That it wasn't done in a boardroom or an engineer looking at it and say, "Hey, we're going to do that." Because we all know those products. I've had a lot of those type of products as well. Where like, who in their right mind designed this for temporary use or for working with 10 people? It's funny when we built our first cart, our first demo cart. And I brought in an engineer because I'm not an engineer and I suck at math, so which is pretty ironic. But I said I knew how to build the cart. I knew what it needed to withstand the rigors of the tent crew, right? And tent life. I brought in an engineer because I wanted to kind of have it proved. And he looked at it and he says, "What the hell is this?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You don't need this. You don't need this. That's too thick. You could change this." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no."
You don't
He says, "How
understand.
much weight do you want it to handle?" I said, "I want it to handle 700 pounds." He goes, "Oh my God, that'll handle 3 times that." I says, "Good, because they're going to break it."
Yeah,
Yep.
So we
stamp it.
want them. That's it. We want it over-engineered, and he just couldn't understand. And he's telling me to take this out, take that out. I said, "No, I'm going to leave it in. If you're telling me that's good, plus, I'm happy."
That's right.
Yep.
And knock on wood, our carts do hold up fairly well. And not going to say they don't break, but they handle some pretty heavy weights and pretty tough conditions. And some of the roughest crews in
Oh, yeah.
any industry are tent crews.
If it can
I don't mean
break,
that in a bad way. It's
oh
just
no,
part of the job. Yeah.
if it can break, a tent company is going to find a way to do it.
I did as a former tent installer.
Yeah.
What I did, we are hard on stuff, like hard on stuff.
One of the first jobs I ever went to was watching people throw brackets out the back of a truck. Right?
Oh, that's just the way of life. Like,
It is.
throw
Well,
stuff.
true story. The first cart we made was made out of steel. It weighed about 180 pounds.
Mm.
And after a month or two, it came back and I don't know, the axles were bent and the handle was broken or bent. And I said to one of my guys, "What happened? This thing is like a tank." They said, "Oh, boss, it's too heavy." So what they were doing is we were transporting them on the top of flatbeds, on top of other gear and tents and stuff. And he says they unstrap it and they were kicking it off because so that was the decision to go aluminum, and we changed the car to an aluminum design to make it easier to handle.
Nice.
Love that.
If you're good with that, let's transition into where the industry is with ballasting. Kind of what, Nick, I want you probably say it, and we've all talked about this in different groups, et cetera, and I'd like to hear it from you, and because you live in this world probably more than most. Give us some background on, I know you talked about your situation too. Give us some background on ballasting and why it's such a hot topic still. Like I said, 5 years and absolutely 5 to 10 anyway on what's happened. Really, I'd say it's ramped up. Not that it wasn't like you said, people have been ballasting tents for a long, long time. I want to talk about water barrels in a minute.
Sure.
But just give us kind of the history and how we came to be to where we are.
I mean, I think the history is we were ballasting for a long time. There's a lot of companies ballasting, but they really weren't working. And I think a lot of people weren't admitting that it wasn't working and kind of sweeping the mistakes under the rug or just being lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the industry finally is catching up to standards of other industries. And engineering standard. I think that's I think that's a lot of what happened too when you started bringing on engineered tents into the mix. Which how old is that, Brian? How long is the first engineered tent that really?
I've been here 20 years and we've had them ever since. But I mean, it's probably
I'd
really
say in the last 10 years they've really been
Oh.
in the market hard and
completely.
The AHJs are looking for those now, and they're looking for the engineering documentation, and they're looking for backup of. Is this enough weight? How do I know it's enough weight? And I think back in, I want to say 2013, don't quote me, when ATA, formerly IFAI, came out with the Ballast study, that was another big notch in the industry's belt to now that there was somebody who actually studied this stuff and actually came up with answers that were hard to find. I think that was a big help and that was a big push and started putting it in people's minds.
Yep.
And, I think the consumer or the clients are getting wiser too. And they were understanding that, hey, we could have a safety issue if this is not done right. Although I could tell you some of the largest venues I tried to bid on jobs and lost, and they were using water barrels on all kinds of tents, and you tried to explain it to them, and they just look at the bottom line. So it was a tough sale for sure.
But along the way, people also realize that that's an actual legitimate revenue stream too, right?
Oh, huge revenue stream. I mean, if you do it right, nobody's going to question safety. So when you tell them, I mean, I had a job. I can't remember the year, but maybe 10 years ago, and it was at a university. And they told us, yeah, we put tents here all the time. It's no problem. We stake the tents and all good. And I'm putting up I don't know, an 80 by 200 tent that's going to have 500 people in it on an elevated platform. I'm like, well, we're going to come do some ground testing. So we go do the ground testing, and we can't get a stake to hold more than 500 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And I come back to the university and I says, listen, we're going to need a new location because this ground is not suited for staking. They said, what do you mean? We have tents there all the time. I showed them the reports of the ground tests. I said, well, we're not going to do it. We're not going to put the tent up because that ground is just not strong enough. I said, you have two options here. We can bring in giant ground augers, but they didn't want us to tear up the ground, or we can bring in ballast, and wound up requiring 200,000 pounds of ballast at a bill of over $20,000 in addition to the tents. But once we laid it out for them and made them understand, they said, I wonder why none of the other tent companies told us to do that. I said, well, we just went that extra mile and just checked before we put the tent up. So I think educating the client, the consumer is a big part of it, and it's been happening. And I think they're finally getting on board too, because it's a tough sale for a tent company to go in and say, hey, we're going to cost you X thousands of dollars more than that's my competitor, but this is why it's going to cost you more. And I think that's important. Yep. My lights went off sitting still too long.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because so many people that are still in water barrels, they're like, well, I don't have the transportation, or it's a hard sell, blah, blah. But it comes down to providing the right resources, and the right information and knowledge to your end user, your customer, so that they understand that this is the proper way to do it, and this is going to actually hold up engineering more than this water barrel stuff will.
Yep. Nick, you mentioned ATA, formerly IFAI. I'll throw in MATRA and ARA in that as well. Is in the past, we keep talking about, really past 10 years since it's really ramped up. Primarily those three organizations have really pressed the gas pedal in making sure we all hold each other accountable, and then giving us the tools to quantify this stuff, right? And you want to talk about the Ballast study that you mentioned. Princeton University did that initial Ballast study, and as a way of quantifying these values that we're talking about.
Correct. The initial Ballast study was done for engineered tents. So even though you had an engineered tent, the manufacturer really wasn't telling you, well, put this much weight on, because they don't know where it's going and they don't know all the information, and they didn't want to take the liability. So what IFAI did with Clemson University is put together this study that tested all these different configurations of how are you going to ballast, not just what or how much weight, but how is it going to be situated, positioned on the tent, attached to the tent. And they really came up with 3 or 4 different scenarios and all the calculations that go with it. So you can go in there and pop this information in, and it'll spit out a number for you. Now, does that mean it's a stamp of approval from an engineer? No, but it's a very good basis to what the tent requires to be ballasted. And then years later, which is recently, about I think that's 2 years ago, they worked with ATA and ARA, and they did the non-engineered Ballast study, which goes for tents that do not have any engineering, which is huge, because up until then it was, you don't know what to put on there, because there was no engineering, couldn't even go to an engineer or an architect. Right. Now at least you have some basis points. And then you're aware that the 3 organizations came together about a year and a half ago and put together a huge educational program and certification track for the industry, which is, well overdue and needed. Yeah. We have these some of the best people out of any industry, and the most qualified and skilled people. I'll put hands down against any other industry, and we get the least credit.
It's true.
Okay? Mm-hmm. Our installers they get zero credit. You go to a construction companies and AV companies, and they've got all these certifications and this, and they have all these accolades. We have nothing, and we're doing the harder work. We're working in, you work for a construction company, It rains. All right, we'll come back tomorrow. And tent crews don't have that option. We're
Tell
putting
Bryan.
up that we're putting up that job, whatever weather condition is. So we deal with some of the worst conditions, the worst timelines, and really, it's about time we put these installers of this industry on a pedestal and say, "Hey, here's a track for you to get yourself more education, to really see that this is a career, not just a job." And I think they're doing a great job, the three organizations. They've put out the initial Foundations of Safe Tenting, which is an online course free to any of the members of those three groups. And then the second track was the anchoring and ballasting certification part. And now they're working on all the other aspects of our industry, frame tents, pole tent structure, and then some. So I think it's a great program. And again, it's helping to legitimize our industry, and not just within the industry, outside the industry, letting other people know and our clients know, hey, we're real, and we work safe, and we want to do everything right and to code. And here's what we're doing and how we're doing it and why our bill is this much money.
Yep. Back to, labor is such a big issue for everybody still. It helps, again, like you said, legitimize that and let prospective employees know that it's a legitimate career.
Correct.
And you're setting up, you got to think about it in terms of you're setting up a tent that is going to house people underneath it. So if you're cutting corners and not doing things the right way, you can legitimately put other people's lives in danger.
Yep.
100%. I think one of the most important things when you go into buy your first tent and set up your first tent, the first thing you understand is safe evacuation procedures and have some kind of severe weather policy with your clients and customers that they know how, no matter whether you're ballast, stake, doesn't matter. You need to have some kind of plan in place and understand it.
Yep. Let's talk about water barrels.
Yeah, I've been waiting for this.
We talk about and make sure everybody knows too. I don't want to gloss over it, but ballast is essentially just putting weight on top of the ground, right? We're not something that doesn't penetrate the surface of the ground. That can look a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. And I'll say right off the bat, we've had codes official wanting me to say that you can't use water barrels. And I have told them, I said, I'm not going to say that. There's a weight. And ultimately, it's the weight and how the weight performs. But the problem typically with water barrels, and Nick, you fill in the gaps for me for sure.
Yeah.
Davis too. So the problem with a water barrel is typically it's in a plastic vessel sitting on some sort of hard surface like asphalt or concrete, something you wouldn't normally penetrate with a stake. So the problem is you got coefficient of friction involved, and those things are more likely to slide because it's plastic on hard surface, right? And then what else do people do? Where do people tie off to a water barrel?
At the top.
They tie it right to the top.
And you're talking about the center of gravity.
So now you're talking about leverage too, right?
Correct.
So now the tent starts moving, it's pulling on the top of something that's 3.5, 4 feet tall, right? Mm-hmm. And now that bearing surface, if that barrel, which is relying on the weight within it to sit on that footprint, when it pulls on the top, what's going to happen? It's going to rotate or it's going to pivot. And now your whole bearing surface that was a 2.5, 3 foot circle now is all concentrated on the corner.
On the edge.
That's right. So,
correct.
And we've actually tested that. We touched on it in a previous podcast, but we have illustrated that before with our tow truck that we bring in to do staking studies. And we tied off on a water barrel, and it effectively held 150 pounds.
Yep.
Right.
That's it.
Correct.
Well, I mean, I think about it when I used to go take down tents. It would take nothing for me to go around and push my water barrels over to drain them with water.
That's right.
I mean, literally, it would take almost no energy at all.
Let's get the terms right?
Yep.
So there's a water barrel and then there's water ballast.
Yep.
Because even though I'm the concrete guy, I'm going to tell you there is a proper way to ballast tents or anything else with water. I'll give you an example. There's a company up in Massachusetts. They had a great system. They had a metal plate that 4 water barrels sat on the metal plate. They got strapped to the plate, and then the tent was guyed down to the plate. That's a fantastic use of water and water barrels. The problem with water barrels is the typical water barrel user is putting one on a leg. They're tying to the top. They're not attached to the leg. There's nothing between the plastic and the concrete. And I'm going to tell you this, they're rarely ever full to the top.
Yep.
Okay, I'll tell you a quick story. I was on taking my son to visit colleges, and every college had tents up with water barrels. And I get to one of them, and I forget where I was. It was a pretty college that I couldn't afford to send my son to. Let's put it that way. So a very prestigious college. I come around the bend, and there's and I'm that tent guy, right? So I walk up. What do? You kick the weight or touch the water barrel, and the first water barrel's empty. Second one's empty. Third one's empty. Fourth one's empty. I get down the end, and I see a hose in one, and I see a crew of six tent guys laying on the ground, taking the sun, waiting for the water barrels to fill.
Yep.
Right. So now what's the problem? They have this tent erected, sitting in a public area, zero ballast because we're filling water barrels. And you'll say, oh, well, what if we have them pre-filled? Well, when they pre-fill them, what do? Well, they don't fill them all the way because when they put them on the hand truck to move it, they don't want to get wet.
Yeah.
And then the water will just tip out. So they're
Been
3/4 full, and then they're dropping them. So there's a whole lot of that's the main issues with water barrels, and a few states and jurisdictions have banned them. And one of the biggest, believe it or not, is California put a ban on water ballast. They wrote that into the code.
Wow.
They didn't put water barrel. They used water ballast. And I had conversations with them through ATA and said, listen, water ballast can be done properly. And, it's not a water barrel. And they were kind of understanding that and loosely using that, but not completely shutting everybody down. And because if you have a proper water ballast, it could be effective. So, because there's another company that makes a nice water barrel system that ties to the leg and has good surface area and holds a lot of weight. There's also companies that are ganging them together, like I mentioned before. There's even AV companies use giant water ballast tanks to hold down their trussing, and technically, based on what California said, it would be banned. But I think they're keeping it a little loose right now because I haven't heard too many people complain.
I think that's why it's also comes back to us and I say the proverbial us as installers, to educate those people on what is okay to do and the right way to go about things.
Correct. And I'll give you one last thing on water barrels, a common mistake, and hopefully people listening, if they're using them, they'll change their ways if that's their only option. Ballast a 20 by 20 tent. What do? We put a barrel on every leg.
Yep.
When we do a 40 by 60 tent, what do? We put a barrel on every leg.
Yep.
Now the tent got how many times larger? 4 times larger.
Yep.
With the same
or more, but the same ballast on each point that's where you'll see it time and time again, and that's a big issue that I see with water barrels. And if you can figure out a better way, you can get them strapped to the leg. You can take up some of the slack. I'm sorry, the sliding issue.
Yep.
Water ballasting can be effective.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, that even ties back in, like, with the block and roll product, the availability and the way you can attach it to the leg is huge.
Yep.
I mean,
right.
Like, people don't think about, okay, well, I can attach it to the leg, and now I'm attaching it to the intermediate bracket, whatever else at the top, and now I have 2 points of contact holding that block, that ballast in place.
Right.
Correct.
So Nick, tell us why, as you devised and developed your system, why concrete?
Well, concrete for the denseness of it. It's you can get pretty much a small ballast with a lot of weight. Obviously, steel is going to be the best, right? If we had right now, I'll give you an example. A 350-pound concrete block is 20 by 20 by 12 inches tall. We can probably achieve that with steel, like maybe 12 by 12 by maybe 4 inches tall. I'm just guessing. I don't have a calculator in front of me. A much smaller footprint, and that's great, right? But the smaller the footprint is, it gets a little harder to move around because it's so compact. And then there's a cost factor. Steel is way more expensive than concrete. So concrete just seemed to be the smarter decision because it's readily available everywhere. You can make your own, you can buy them pre-made, and it has enough weight in a small enough package to work with a tent. Because if you're ballasting water, even if you had a good water ballast system, let's say you have a tent that needs 4,000 pounds, okay, which is common in some of these bigger structures.
Sure.
Or more. But let's say this is just 4,000 pounds as an average. To achieve that with water, you won't be able to get in the tent. There won't be enough room between the legs. So you'd have to have something that's going to be more dense and more compact. And concrete was just the smartest decision, for being readily available and inexpensive, relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, and that also allowed you guys to be able to sell the forms as you guys do too, and then customers can pour their own on site. And we've talked to you. You know, you see the orders, Nick, but I'm telling you, we go, Davis. You know, we go around, and it's the gold standard now, right?
It's
people have embraced it. Before they would have 50-gallon drums stacked to the heavens on the back side of the building just to keep them out of the way, and now I go in and I see stacks and stacks of blocks.
You know what's funny? I'm actually getting old water barrels from some companies around here that I've been making deer troughs out of because they don't use them anymore.
Yeah.
I got a little something coming up soon, a new product to take your old water barrels and repurpose them. So
I like it. I like it. Can't wait to hear more about that.
What did you say?
One of my greatest memories of first sales, or one of the first couple of early days of selling block and roll, was a company and pulled up to drop off their carts, and they owned 700 water barrels.
Wow.
And you just think about that and this is the early stages, and here they are getting into it. And I don't know if they've fully converted at this point, because that's a lot of stuff, but I imagine they did at this point. It's been a number of years.
That's a lot of work if they need that many to do whatever work they're doing.
Now I'm really interested in what he's coming out with for repurposed water barrels.
Yeah. Obviously, just touching back on it, one of the big things to the outputs of today's podcast, I want to make sure everybody understands that it's vital that we do this stuff correctly. Nick is the kind of industry resident expert on ballasting because of what he's done with his business, and we just can't reiterate it enough that it's on us to educate and to do this stuff properly. So let's talk about how much weight is enough, right? I know we talked about the engineered, non-engineered studies. Let's talk about, first of all, rules of thumb that have been developed, right? And then we'll get into some of the studies that have helped kind of quantify that. So what's the going rule of thumb just in a general baseline ballast situation? What do most people...
The spit out number has always been 10 pounds per square.
Easy math has been, and Nick, you jump in because we tell people only what we know. Davis and I are up to be educated today as well. But what we've been told over time is 10 pounds a square foot. But what does that represent? Does that mean that we're going to talk about a specific wind load or anything like that?
Right. No, I would say, I like to go with 10 to 15, and I'll tell you why. Because I've done a lot of calculations through the ballast study and through engineers, and typically it's in that range for sure. So if you average it out, we always like to say 10 is a minimum.
Yep.
Again, it's just like anything when you're ballasting or having an engineer or even the ballast study, a lot of it's by wind load, right? So if you're ballasting for 50 miles an hour, which I don't think anybody should ballast anything less than that, but if you're ballasting for 50 miles an hour, you're going to get one number. And let's just say arbitrary number, it comes up with 500 pounds a leg, just for argument's sake, or whatever size 10. But now you take that rating up to 90 miles an hour. And now that same 500-pound weight might go to 1,500 or 2,000 pounds a leg.
Yep.
So, so it's, while 10 pounds is a good rule of thumb, meaning it's just easy to do math with, most of the engineering I've seen lands in that 10 to 15, meaning 10 pounds for the lower wind rating and 15 for the higher. Not that it's an exact science, but it's pretty close. And that's why I think we were fairly safe at using those terms. Because if you recalculated a tent, it's going to come usually somewhere in that range.
I'm guessing Nick's done more calculations than anybody else I know.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yeah.
I've done quite a few.
I'm sure. So, have you ever had anybody go, wow, that's not nearly as much weight as I thought you were going to tell me I needed? It's always the other way, right?
No, it's always a shocker.
Yeah, every time I have this conversation, the feedback I get is like, are you serious?
Oh, yeah. Come on, man. There's no way.
How can we operate like that? And you can, and people do it.
Yep.
I mean, I'm going to say this and take it as you will.
That's right.
I haven't met a 40-wide tent of any manufacturer that required less than 2,000 pounds at its engine, at its high wind rating.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen one calculation come in less. Now, for a lower wind rating, yes, 50 mile an hour wind rating, you can get a lower ballast point. And the non-engineered ballast study will calculate you by wind.
Yep.
Other engineers will also do that. They will give you site-specific engineering and say, okay, we're going to rate this for 50 miles an hour. We need this ballast on here, but we want the tents evacuated at 30 miles an hour or 35. And there are ways to get around that.
I have seen some of the output of engineering that we've requested for specifically for site-specific stuff that we've done over the past few years, where the engineer actually puts on the document. Before it was just base reactions, right? But then I have seen where they say that we recommend X number of pounds. You seen that too, Nick?
Yes, I've seen that, and wind based on a wind rating.
And that goes to the
They're
point
usually
too.
calculating on a wind rating.
Right. That goes to the point too. So many of our customers say, and I've heard people say this, that yeah, we still stake tents, but by and large, especially when we know we can make money on it, we like ballast because ballast is constant.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Correct.
Right.
I would agree. I've had plenty of jobs where we staked, and the next overnight there was huge rainfall, and we'd come in and we'd have some failed stakes, and we'd have to come in and reinforce the stakes or add ballast, whereas a ballast will never get any less weight. And let's say you're borderline and you didn't put really enough weight on your tent, but you were ballasting and you get a good jolt of wind, and the tent maybe it shifts a couple of inches. Well, when it shifts and sets back to normal, you still have all that weight on.
Right.
When it hits a staked tent and it causes a failure of a stake, and that initial jolt of wind, you've now compromised the stake, and you may not come back from that. So it depends on the situation. So I always did sleep better with ballast on tents than stakes because I knew what I had.
Got it.
You know the old saying, right? The old tent owner's worst thing he wants to hear. His crew gets back and he says, how did it go? And the crew leader says, oh, it went great. Steaks went in like butter.
I was about to say,
Yeah, right.
I was about to say, he's about to say that steaks went in so easy today. And you're like, that's not a good thing.
Maybe we should go back.
Yeah.
That's right.
I do want to touch on one thing real quick. When it comes to putting tension on these ballast, right? And I've seen this before. There is such thing as putting too much tension on your strap on the ballast, because you, in turn, will pull the ballast somewhat off the ground and lose some of that holding power.
Seen it tons of times.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So,
and you know why it's done?
No,
because we don't need a ladder. We're just going to stand on the water barrel. We're going to stand on the block to reach the strap. We're going to tighten it with an extra 165 pounds on it.
Yep.
And then jump off.
Yep.
And that weight will actually come off the ground.
Correct. And that's something I just want to point out, because there are installers, or the majority of the people listening to this podcast are installers. Be mindful of that, because if you do go around and you just throw tension on it and you're not actually visually looking at the ballast while you're doing so, you can pull that weight up, and that 500-pound block just became 460.
If you're ratcheting a ballast and it begins to move, slide across the ground, you've gone too far. Would you agree with that, Nick?
I would agree with that 100%.
Yep.
It should be snug, but not over tensioned. You got to remember, you're using straps. Let's take a typical 1-inch strap, and you can tell me better. Let's say it has a break point of, I'm sorry, not a break point, a working load of 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. The break point might be 2,000 pounds or 3,000 pounds before it breaks. So you have that much force in that strap. And if you're only tensioning a 500-pound ballast or a 700-pound ballast, you're going to over-tension immediately. So you really have to be careful not to over-tension your straps.
Really relying on that friction between the ballast and the ground too, wouldn't you? So what do you say? That's right, Nick.
I would say 100%, and that's why I would also say, and the ballast study concurred, any ballast you use, no matter what it is, if you can get it tied to the leg, you are going to help the situation 100%. Not 100%. You're going to get 20, 30% more holding power, because you're losing when the tent fails. And I've shown this, and we've done that wind demo at Matra and a couple other shows. When the tent fails, what's happening is typically the ballast point gets moved or slides, like a water barrel can slide away. Once it slides away, it creates a little bit of slack in the guy line. Okay, and that's all it takes to get that little bit of slack, or the wind came in and pushed the sidewalls and kicked the leg in, and you created slack to your ballast or your water barrel, whatever it is. Now you have this little dancing effect that now the wind is hitting and you're jumping and bouncing and bouncing and bouncing, and eventually something's going to break. And that's typically where the fail point is. So the longer you can keep that leg upright, that's why I know many of your tents, or not, if not all of your frame tents or structure style tents, all have a hole in the base plate, and they're intended to be anchored.
Yep.
And I don't know what your rating is on that. It's typically you might use a 42-inch or a stake, the same stake to make it easy, but the rating is probably not the same as the out guys. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. But so you definitely want to have something anchored and holding that leg in. That's going to really give you a leg up when you ballast, or whatever it is. If it's a concrete block, a barrel, a weight, a water ballast, get it attached to the leg. You're going to have much more holding power and more time before it fails.
I love it. So one of the things too, when you look at the matter engineered, non-engineered tent, you get to choose what configuration you use, because it has so much to do with the ultimate performance of that ballast. So tell us a couple different ways, Nick, of getting that holding power of that ballast maximized versus what's the most common way people would do that?
Well, let's maybe not the most common, but let's talk about the most efficient as determined by the ballast study.
Okay.
The most efficient for frame style tents was the ballast close to the leg and attached to the leg, whether it's a plate or direct, however, or strap, whatever it is, and then guide down to the block. That was considered the most efficient rather than having the block out there. So if you took that block and now put it 6 feet out where you normally put a stake, the block has to be much heavier because now you have a tip over effect where you could now, because you have leverage from an 8-foot or a 10-foot high eave on your tent that you're coming down, and now you're pulling. Now there's a turnover effect that can happen where you can turn that weight over or have it slide. And once it slides, you create that slack. So they do show you that configuration is one of the configurations where it's 6 feet away, but if you do the calculations, it'll probably be double the amount of weight that you need. Where if you bring it closer, now you have to determine if your tent is designed for that, and you have to make sure maybe it requires a larger ballast or 2 ballasts so you can get that angle on your strap a little bit wider out, because some tents do require that for structure. They need to have that good angle, 45 degree or close. So those are the things you want to look at. But they did determine that having it close and attached to the leg was the most efficient way to ballast.
Got it. I would tell people also that are listening to this that they may have non-engineered tents typically that don't have an interface for a stake. Talk to your manufacturer. They may have modifications. Talk to B&R. I don't know what you guys have, Nick, but there may be things available to you to add to the base plate of your tent to help interface with these systems that are available.
I mean, I think some other manufacturers even have smaller provisions. Even it's a half-inch or a 3/8-inch hole at the bottom of their base plate, and you just put a 10-inch nail in there. And believe it or not, that 10-inch nail will give you some more holding power because it's going to keep that sidewall from moving and sliding, which does compromise the tent. I mean, I really do believe that's the first thing to compromise the tent is a leg kicking in.
Yep. I always say we like triangles in this industry, but they're not all equal, right?
That's right.
What else you got, Davis?
I mean, that's pretty in depth and covered on my end. You got anything?
I'm trying to put
let me, if you don't mind, let me cover like the hardest part. We talked about it just briefly. You touched on it, Davis, a little earlier. The hardest part about getting into ballast, any kind of ballast other than water ballast, any kind of concrete ballast, whether it's block and roll or regular, we call them mafia blocks here in New York, or big bin blocks, or landscape blocks, whatever you call them in your part of the world. The biggest challenge is transportation.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
Right. Yep. So it's huge. I mean, it's huge. And I think that, that's the biggest hurdle. Somebody's going to say, well, how am I going to move these blocks, or how am I going to get the job done? And I'll be honest with you, you're a smaller tent company. Maybe you're just getting into ballasting. Maybe you have a trailer or a box truck with a lift gate. So maybe you can move some smaller blocks, but you can't move large quantities. Look around in your community. There's a lot of local trucking guys or trucking companies independent truckers that can help you haul equipment and weight and move it. You don't want to start overloading your trucks. That's a very common thing when people are new and they're just putting weight on the trucks. So that's an important thing. So it's your fleet is going to eventually change once you start doing ballasting. Now, if you're doing just smaller backyard tents and smaller jobs, some companies I've been told will take, maybe their truck can handle 8,000 pounds. It's a standard box truck, 24 foot with a lift gate on it. They'll put their ballast in the truck and they'll do a run the day before and drop their ballast at the locations. Okay. This way, the next truck comes the next day. It's not overloaded. It has all the tent gear and the rentals, and they have their hand truck or block and roll dolly, whatever kind of thing they're using, and they can just position the weights, put them on, and then they reverse that process out of there. I think the next evolution I've seen in transporting blocks is a trailer. But trailers can be difficult because trailers can be high and be difficult to get the blocks on top of. So I've seen the most efficient trailer is a drop deck trailer, which is a flatbed trailer that kind of drops flat to the ground. Makes it easier to roll blocks on with a hand cart or a pallet jack, whatever you're using. And I think that's a next evolution. And then, of course, you get into the bigger things. But what's out there in the industry to help? Companies like Tent Docs, they're helping everyday rental companies move ballast, move all their materials that they have to move. So it's not as an impossible task as it was even 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It was much harder to do ballasting. I mean, when I started really doing ballasting by the truckload as a rental company, we were using forklifts, and so we were renting a forklift to the job site. We were loading a contracted flatbed truck. They were driving to the job site. We were unloading with forklifts, dispensing, and then reversing the process. So it can happen. We didn't own the trucks at that time. We didn't own any big trucks. Years ago, I sat at an ARA meeting, ARA show, listening to a speaker. This must be 20 years ago or 25 years ago, and they showed videos of their fleet. I'm like, why do these people have tractor trailers? I don't understand. I just don't get it. And boy, did I understand that later on, because by the last 10 years of operating our business in New York, we owned 2 tractors, rented a few more, and had about 6 of our own trailers that we were just had drivers moving product back and forth. So you will get there. It's very difficult in the beginning. Be mindful of your truck weights, gross weight, and what they can handle. So how much does your truck weigh? Minus that from what your gross is. Also have to consider the driver, the staff that's in the truck, whatever else you have, accessories in your truck that you keep, a toolbox and stakes and different things that are on the bottom of your truck. That's all part of your weight. Yep. Make sure you're calculating that properly and not to overload your trucks. That's very important.
Yeah, DOT will get you real quick.
Yep.
They will get you. And God forbid you have an accident and you're overweight, you're negligent now. So it's very important that you watch your weights on your trucks.
Absolutely.
So certainly tons of opportunity for revenue on these, and nothing is insurmountable for even a smaller company. I'd recommend anybody talk to Nick directly if you've got specific questions about how to get into that. I think Nick's done enough of it to guide people through. What you got, Dennis?
And I was about to say, don't look at ballasting as like a hurdle. Look at it as like you said, another revenue stream. Look at it as an aid to help your business grow, because
real opportunity.
Really is.
Yep. 100. But you know how many customers call me and thank me and say, I couldn't have grown because I couldn't take on that type of work.
I don't doubt it at all.
I had to keep turning down those clients because I couldn't do it correctly. Mm-hmm. And they finally were able to do the job. So it's very important. It is a stepping stone, but it is it's not a hurdle. It's an advancement of your company and business. And that's how it should be looked at.
It's awesome, just a little bit of growing pain.
I think a lot of people owe Nick a big round of applause too for figuring this stuff out, right? And sure. It goes to the point, the whole and not this is not intended to be an advertisement, but it's kind of sort of is. But Nick figured out how to move this stuff around. I always tell people the cost is not in the blocks; it's in transportation. You got to figure out how to move it. That's not meaning just putting it on a truck. I'm talking about how to move it around the site, how to place it efficiently, right, Nick? Instead of moving that stuff, you don't want to move these big 300, 500, 700 pound, whatever they are, blocks around multiple times. And Nick's got the equipment figured out the way to do that.
And again, whatever you're using, make sure there's a means to move it safely. I had, moving these big barrels filled with concrete. I had them go over a bunch of times and hurt some guy, hurt some crew.
Yeah.
Break a foot or damage not damage, but injure a foot or something like that. So just be ready. And I always laugh at the story. I don't know if we have time, but real quick, guys would tell me all the time, "Oh, I use round concrete ballast because I can roll them," and that's great.
Mother Nature would never do that.
But how you gonna stop
They keep
it?
telling me more, so they keep telling me more. Well, they're great. They're easy to move. I don't need any hand truck. I just turn them on their side and roll them. And then the conversation will keep going, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah. Once or twice, one rolled away, hit a car. One time, we had one roll into a lake, and oh yeah, I did have a guy hurt his back once because he was trying to flip it over. So those are all. Do something that's not going to create more issues for you, and that's the key. It's not just about block and roll. It's about whatever you're using. Be smart about it because you have a lot of things to take into consideration. So the logistics is one of the most important things. How are you going to move it? How are you going to handle it? How is it going to get on your truck? And again, so important because for me, after that second load I lost on the highway, it was a aha moment. You come to Jesus moment that we had to do something.
Wow.
And
talking about safety,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people at risk.
Well, we talk about safety all the time and the proper PPE, but if you're not using equipment properly, that PPE doesn't really matter.
No.
And exactly. And efficiency is key in this industry. It is so paramount to be efficient because everything costs so much money and good labor is so hard to come by. So you really have to work as efficient as possible. How much time do we have? You have a minute for a quick story?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so I'm going to give you a quick story. So I was doing this large job in New York City. It was a Tribeca Film Festival. It spanned, I don't know how many blocks and spurred off into the side streets. And we get this job and it's over 150 tents. And most of them are on the 30 foot wide tents. It's just a overnight setup and the whole thing. So we come in and we have to load in overnight on a Friday night. And the event is on Saturday. So the first couple of years we're doing this job, with the loadout, we're loading out till, I don't know, 4:00 in the morning. And it's on the streets of Manhattan. And I'd be walking down this, the guys are working, crews are working, and trucks are moving. And I would hear these sounds. And I don't know if the microphone's going to pick it up, but it would sound like this, right? And you'd be walking another half a block, and you'd hear this sound again, this smacking sound. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And finally, somebody comes over to me because I was talking. I says, "What is that noise? What is that we keep hearing? This smacking sound that's just smacking." And they said, "Oh, that's the tenants in the high rise. They hate this job. They buy cases of oranges and throw them out the window at you."
Oh my!
So we were dodging oranges from 30 floors up.
Wow.
That were hitting the ground and smacking, and we couldn't tell where they were coming from.
Wow.
So the moral of the story is, the last year we used our makeshift ballasting, 4:00 in the morning, dodging orange. I had to put hard hats on everybody. The next year when we were fully block and roll, we were done at 10 p.m.
Wow.
instead of 4 a.m.
That's
There you go.
So that's the efficiency story. It's do what's going to make the job more efficient. And we don't have to dodge the oranges anymore.
I was about to say.
We got a good customer friend of mine that said that we're essentially just labor and delivery companies, right? We're a labor company. We use people to move stuff around.
Or transportation.
So you better figure out how to move it.
Yeah.
You're missing one other thing, Brian.
What's that?
We are maintenance.
Maintenance too.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we create a lot of those
labor, delivery, and maintenance.
That's right.
Well, that's what we do.
We create the maintenance work ourselves many times. But yeah, so Nick, I can't thank you enough for being with you. I have one question before we kind of wrap up. Did you catch any fish this morning?
I actually caught my new PB on a fluke, 21 inches. It was a good morning.
Yep. For people down south, a fluke's a flounder, right?
A flounder, yeah. It was a walk-off cast. I was done. I said, let me just throw one more time and got a good hookup.
What'd you say? How big?
21 inches.
Yeah, that'll make a meal.
It's a slab.
Yeah, I've got it slated. Well, everybody's going to love this episode for the clash of the accents between the Southern accent and the New York City boy.
We talk totally normal.
What are
We
you
don't
talking
have an
about?
accent.
You sound funny. It's not us.
No, Nick, I can't thank you enough for being such a resource to the industry. And
I'm just going to drink my water.
yeah,
Okay?
Water.
yeah, I like it. But no, Nick's a huge resource for so many. And again, if you're looking at getting into ballasting and trying to figure out how to navigate all that, Nick's a hell of a resource. Pick up the phone, call him. Nick would love to talk to you, I'm sure. And like I said, none of this stuff is insurmountable. There's so many people in the industry who've already done it and figured it out. And I always say a lot of this stuff, why do we have to figure out something that's already working? Let's go ahead and move forward. Right.
And one thing, ATA, Nick's very involved in ATA. Those that aren't watching, we don't have a live stream or anything like that, so they can't see the video. But behind Nick is a derby car, and it's a big deal at ATA now is the derby car race. So those listeners that have never joined or been to ATA, it is a fabulous resource. It's a great show to go to. Nick, you're on the board, right?
As current president, correct?
Yeah, I'm the current chair of the board right now. And January 27th to the 29th, Kissimmee, Florida.
Yep.
And it's a great tent show and the greatest soapbox derby. And we hope to have, last year we had 16 entries. We're hoping to get about 10 more. The rental companies can enter and manufacturers. So it's not just limited to the manufacturers.
I like it. We don't need anybody mixing it up in the pits or anything like that either. So it can hopefully they get out of control. But no, Nick, thank you so much. And with that, we're going to sign off. Again, we'll talk to you soon. And Davis, you got anything before we leave?
No, we really appreciate your time, Nick.
Yep.
No, thank you. You guys got a great show, and it's great for the industry that you guys have this type of show to really keep them in tune with what's going on. So I commend you. Thank you, guys.
With that, we're going to wrap it up, and thank you, and catch us on all of our social media platforms, and we'll see you soon.
All right, later, taters.